This episode is part of a special bonus series presented by Jotform. Jotform Enterprise provides an all-in-one solution to streamline administrative tasks, enhance community engagement, and foster innovation. Using their no-code drag-and-drop forms and workflows, your teams can securely collect and store data, automate routine tasks, and collaborate on team resources. Educational institutions are also eligible for a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. jotform.com/enterprise/education. And a quick note, this episode is part of a special bonus series. You can find the video version exclusively on Jotform's YouTube network. This week's episode is titled AI Trends You Should Watch This Year with Carl Hooker, and I'm excited to welcome Carl to the podcast. I have known him for over a decade and knew that he would have some great insights to share on this topic of artificial intelligence. Before we recorded, I asked Carl to share a few AI trends that were front of mind for him, and in today's episode, he unpacks each one and gives listeners plenty of actionable tips. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Carl. I'm so excited to chat with you today about AI trends you should watch this year. But before we get into all of that, can you share a bit with listeners about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, thanks, Monica, for having me. Carl Hooker. I am a consultant and speaker out of Austin, Texas, 26-year educator. What I do day to day is I work with schools, I work with companies in different formats. And so some of it is consulting and advising virtually, but some of it is also going and presenting and working with faculty and staff and integrating technology, which, of course, over the last 2 years has involved quite a bit of AI. As you well know, Monica.
Right. Yeah. Some of the big themes that you and I have both supported educators on around classroom technology integration has seen a bit of a shift, right? Or this almost adjacent lane, I like to think of it, right? Where AI is a big part of the conversation. So before we jump into these big AI trends for the second half of the school year, what are you currently seeing in schools or hearing from educators around artificial intelligence?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let's see. So ChatGPT came out November of 22. So 2 years ago plus when everyone's watching this. So, I think when you think about the Krebs hype cycle, which is something I always kind of watch and monitor, I feel like, the hype of AI really peaked sometime last spring. I feel like this summer when we were at ISTE and a lot of other conferences, I started hearing a little bit of the grumblings of like, well,
yeah,
maybe this, maybe this. And now I feel like we are full on into what I call the trough of disillusionment. Actually, I don't call it. It's part of the hype cycle, which is that period of time when the AI hype is kind of waned off. And you're starting to see more and more of the stories about, AI was doing this, or a kid got involved with AI and something happened, just so some more of the negative stories come out about it. And I think what that does in terms of the teachers that you and I work with is that it puts more doubt, more fear, more uncertainty, all of those things into their brains and says, well, maybe we should just step away from this. Maybe this isn't appropriate for kids' use. And the truth is, I've never said just give it to a kid and let them try it out, right? It's all about the monitoring, the guidance, and then how you're actually integrating it. So from what I see in terms of trends, I see that there's a little bit of that happening. But at the same time, I think as teachers get more educated on it, and we're still, I think, as a country, way behind on that. I want to say maybe 40-something% now. I can't remember the last number I saw. It was early September. It was like 35% of teachers have been trained on it. It's probably closer to 40 now, but that's still a lot that have no idea what it is, what it does. They think it's a coding solution. They think they have to know computer science to do it. So I think that fear, uncertainty, and doubt is still a big thing. And so again, our role, my role, your role is really to go out there and really teach and educate. And I'm hopeful that it's still, the promise of AI to me is still out there. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So for me, I don't know if you've seen a similar thing, but I feel like there's been a little bit of that hesitancy that comes up, and it's happened since the beginning, I guess.
Yeah. And, there's those parallels to just education technology adoption too, right? That pause, that hesitation. So much recently, I was just in Colorado with a group of educators yesterday. One of the big things I say is like that healthy hesitation. Like, it's okay to be a little, freaked out, a little bit worrisome. Like, feel your feelings because they're all legitimate, especially when things are moving really quickly. So, interesting to hear that you're seeing that, in the spaces that you're working with too, because I think there are plenty of people who have spent the past 2 years pressing all the buttons, right, and trying things out. And then there's others who are still like in the wait and see mode, which I kind of understand, right? How, people react to any kind of big change. So, as we think about some of the most exciting AI trends in education this year, right, this school year, and why educators should pay attention to them. One of the things, you shared before we jumped on was that tutoring was on this list. So can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about this AI trend and where you see it heading as we, get into the second half of the school year?
Yeah, just earlier this week, I saw some data about, again, students' use of AI as a tutoring agent, as a tutoring assistant is what it's really called to referred to as, and a slight uptick, and not transcendental, like any type of amazing growth in test scores, but enough of an uptick to show that in certain areas, having an AI tutor can actually be a helpful thing for students. It's not going to replace a full-on personal tutor that can make those relationships and connections that AI can't. But what I do see is, for the first time really ever in education, the idea that it could be equitable to all students. So all of a sudden, you go from those, and I always ask teachers this when we talk about cheating, and I was like, how many of you feel like, having a college kid help write an essay for a high school student for their college entry, is that help? Is that cheating? And they're like, no, it's just someone helping. I was like, yeah, but you have to pay for that. And how many families can actually afford it? So for me, I'm most excited about this part of AI if done well. And I say tutoring, it's not just giving them the answers. Like, we know there's tools, I won't mention them, but there's some that you could just like take a picture of the math problem and it'll tell you the answer, right?
Right.
But there are others like Conmigo, which is, of course, again, built on math as a background, that does more of a coaching, like, well, you didn't quite get this right. What do you think about this? So giving them kind of like a little bit of back and forth. So to me, that is number one for me. I just see that as being across the board a great game changer for all the students, especially those that don't have access to an everyday tutor.
Yeah, just the ability to get everyone some support, right? It might look different. Of course, quality is huge, like you mentioned, to make sure that these tools are, coaching as opposed to just spitting out an answer. And, I also see that as a way for educators to scale their impact, right? To gather some really great data on what kids need and help support everyone when they might see a whole bunch of hands and can't run in all the different directions.
Yeah.
It's there as an extension, right, of what a teacher knows their students need. So love that one is on your list. You also shared that admin tasks, the things that we do that fall into our more administrative work, right, is another AI trend in education this year. Why is this one that educators should pay attention to?
I think this was the first one that a lot of administrators glommed onto, was the idea that it could help them write emails a little bit better. I had one just a couple of weeks ago tell me they were feeling a little bit emotional. And so they were typed up an email to reply to a staff member. And they said, you know what, before I do this, they put it through a little AI engine and said, help me write this a little softer. And so instead of coming across so aggressive, and actually all those tech directors or tech leaders out there listening, sometimes we are the worst at this because we're very curt sometimes in our response, like, no, that won't work. So instead, like, tell me how to say this a little bit better. So it's helping a little bit with that. The other one, that's fairly new on the scene, Notebook LM. I know you've played with it.
Yeah.
But I was talking actually to a group of superintendents in Long Island, and they were telling me that one of them they're onboarding a new assistant superintendent. And so they took Notebook LM, took all their documents, board documents, things like that, mission statements and all of that, all the stuff that you'd have like in an onboarding packet or a big binder, and they put it in a Notebook LM and allowed them to kind of do some Q&A with it, do a little study guide, have the little audio podcast generate. And so it was a way for them to kind of quickly have some interaction versus just like, here's this huge packet, go home and learn it next week, and then we'll see you on Monday. It's giving them a chance to have a little more interactivity. So it kind of makes the page kind of come to life. So I've always liked that. I think those are big things. There goes my dog.
Yeah. Those are such great examples, Carl, the communication piece of administrative tasks. I know I sometimes joke with educators at events, like, I'm a member of the exclamation point club, like I can't help it, right?
Oh, me too.
But it's just like, it's not always needed, right? Maybe I just need to tone it down. And, I need that extra layer to take a peek at it. And, the Notebook LM example you gave is really interesting because, one of my first hesitations, and I uploaded the first chapter of my book to play around with it. I uploaded a menu from a pizza place around the corner from our house, just to see what kind of conversation would happen right in this audio.
Yeah.
But one of my thoughts was, what if they get it wrong, right? Or they restate something from my book that isn't quite how I meant it. Well, if you're uploading all of these minutes from school board meetings that you didn't attend, you're probably going to get some errors when you talk to someone who was at that meeting and they tell you what happened, right? And you're like, I don't think that's what that person meant when they said, right? So things can get lost.
The telephone game. Yeah.
Right. So for as much as we might have some hesitation taking someone's word for it, right, as they're restating what happened in a meeting, if we're looking at these notes, we can kind of bring that into the notebook LM2 to say that doesn't sound exactly right. So I'm going to fact check that one, right? Or, so I do think that's a really interesting example for onboarding.
And you could probe it. You could probe it now too. So it's giving you some more I want to pull out specific things. I did my whole book. I was I'm going to put the whole book in there and see what it does. And it did generate a podcast that was 13 minutes long, and it was, it gave me the basics of the book, but it wasn't anything in depth. So someone listened to it, they would hear, oh, it's a nice little overview, but I'm sure I could probe it more. But it's funny how you say we almost have a bias, towards we want the human element more than the technical one. I think about with self-driving cars. I always tell people would you get in a car with a computer and let it drive you? And they're like, no, that's scary. And I'm like, but you'll let your 16-year-old who's distracted drive all over the road and get more accidents. But we have comfort in that because we know that, right? And that's the same with this tool and these tools we're talking about.
But yeah, and I think that pushback, that reflection, right, is huge here, right, as we look at all these different trends. A quick note from the presenter of today's episode, Jotform. Jotform Enterprise lets you build a form in minutes. Student survey forms, homework submission forms, online quizzes, and so much more. You can start from scratch, or if you want to get a head start, check out their collection of free form templates designed with teachers, schools, and districts in mind. Learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise. Head to their website to learn more. Jotform.com/enterprise/education. And so, another one you added to our list today is content creation. And I'm sure that you've got a wide range of examples of what this can look like in practice for educators.
Yeah, I to me, one of the number one things that I heard as a pushback, besides the cheating thing, is a trend that there's a thought that AI will cause us to be less creative. And I do think with, again, like anything, if you just let kids just go out and do whatever they want, sure, it may help them take some shortcuts. But what I've seen is the opposite. I've seen that AI can help us be more creative. So for example, I'll give you just a few. So I'm not an artist. I can draw a little bit, but I'm not a great artist. But using the I Can't Draw feature on Padlet or any type of the other image generators that are out there, quickly with some prompting language, descriptive language, which actually, by the way, helps with writing and ELA, you can create artwork out of that, right? And things that would have taken me years to do or design. And again, I have to have some knowledge of it. And Suno is another one that I've shared, and you used it, you shared that too. Great. I'm not a musician. I'm a DJ, which means I can play lots of other people's music. And for Suno, what it does, I can now text up a kind of example of a song I want to have created. But if I'm a music person and I have a musical background, I can actually be even more specific about what the prompt is. So I could say, give me a G chord, a guitar playing in G chord, and then more specifics, again, music language that I don't even know.
Right.
And the songs will be richer and better. And again, I could use that as maybe a preempter to say, okay, now I'm going to write my own song based on kind of that response. So it's not going to usurp creativity, but I do think it's going to help generate it for those kids or those of us that maybe didn't have access to, let's say, we're not paintbrush artists, but maybe we're artists with a keyboard, that kind of thing. So I get that. I get excited about content creation. And then again, on the back end of this with webinars, you and I do a bunch of these. I've been playing with Opus Clips lately, which is basically you can take a webinar, throw it into Opus Clips. And what it does is it takes little bite-sized segments, a little 30-second scrollable Instagram, TikTok segments, does all the closed captioning for you. So again, short bite-sized sound bites versus spending hours and hours and hours. So that's kind of content creation mixed with productivity. Yeah. And it's not perfect. Just like you said earlier, it's not always perfect. You got to make sure you double check it. But, again, for the amount of things they can do in that quick of a time, like we spend so much time worrying about the technology that we forget about the learning and the content and the creation. Now I think maybe the technology will be the back row. And now we're going to focus more about what can we do with this?
Yeah. And you really are in the driver's seat with these tools. Like you have to have that content expertise and experience to make any of these things work well. And, even with the music generation example you gave, like, I cue it up when I demo for people and I say drums. Like, I don't know more
Yeah.
that,
The
right? Like,
snare drum. I don't know.
exactly. Like, it would take me a minute playing a game of categories to think of more than a type of percussion instrument, right? So, like, I say drums or jazz flute, and like I pretty much top out, at 5 or 6 instruments on top of my head. But if I had the content expertise, right, I could really push it or tweak different things or make something that was, really special, as opposed to probably a little bland and cheesy, which is what's coming out, when I'm making something for a group. And, for all of these pieces, these trends that you shared about the tutoring and coaching, the administrative tasks, the content creation, right? There's so much that AI can do. And, one area I've heard a lot about this year, and I've shared some, favorite tools in this category is, more people are talking about how this can be used to personalize learning for students. And, we've seen adaptive learning things in the past that are maybe using AI more behind the scenes. We wouldn't have, now we're point at it and we call it AI, right? But how are these AI powered tools really personalizing learning experiences for kids? And what does this mean, or might this mean in the future for classroom instruction?
Yeah, and I think you and I, as people that have gone back to the iPad, explosion on the scene, right? And remember the promise of personalized learning with iPads, and then what do we see? We saw in some cases, there's some small use cases where if you did it the right way, it could be personalized. Every student could have their personal teacher assistant right with them. But in general, I it felt like it was more like we're going to take our traditional old curriculum with our traditional delivery style and now make it digital and send you digital worksheets that we all want you to turn in at the exact same time, which isn't really personalized at all. It just means you get to do it on your own device. So I think even with AI, I hesitate that I'm excited. I think AI potentially is tenfold greater than what an iPad could do in terms of personalized learning, but we have to use it the right way. And we have to encourage teachers to use it the right way. And it's not going back to just like, well, now the test is going to adjust based on what you answered, which is great. But again, like you just said, that's adaptive. That's not personalized. There's a great video. I don't know if you've seen John Spencer's video on this. He does a little YouTube, like one of those little animated kind of hand-drawn videos. It's about 4 minutes long. And it's spot on. It defines adaptive learning versus personalized, and why what we think sometimes is personalized learning, meaning every kid gets their own little test question, isn't really personalized. It's just adaptive. And so I think for me, and I think it's going to come back to all the things we just talked about with tutoring and admin tasks and content creation, is a teacher is now going to have some time to actually get to know the students more, build those relationships, and then really start to customize and blend in AI and any other tool they want to help the kid really kind of personalize their own learning journey. And so again, it comes back to, does the teacher have the time to kind of manage that? And then how do the students actually utilize it in a way that's effective for learning? So it's going to come down to the humans again. It's great. We talk about the tools, and I think you and I could probably do this for decades. You and I have talked about this, and it still comes back to the humans that are involved using them. And so if they're not using them the right way, it's just going to fall back to old trends, and we're going to continue to kind of do the same thing over and over again. So I'm hopeful, and I do see the potential in it. But again, it comes down to us.
Yeah. And I think that kind of hopefulness, right, that visioning of what's possible, is something that people are wrapping their heads around a little bit more. And I think asking some smarter questions about what they're actually interacting with. And, I found this a lot during distance learning, because so many teachers, administrators were spending more time in these ed tech tools. They started asking better questions about privacy or data, and what this might mean, right? Or they just had a deeper vocabulary around this. And I'm starting to find that too around the AI of it all. So, what steps should educators take to introduce AI literacy to their staff and colleagues, right? Or to their students? Are you finding that people are having more of these ethical discussions about AI in their classrooms?
It is starting to happen more and more. And I do think what you just said probably lends credence to that. The fact that we came off of a pandemic where we were thrown a whole influx of tools to use as fast as we could. And some of those were good and some of those were not so good. I think teachers are looking at things with a little more discerning eye when it comes to that privacy model and the ethics of what they're doing. I think what I always try to give advice to teachers is, like, if you're trying these things for the first time, two things. One is, if it's something you haven't, like if it's a company that's fairly new, it's a startup, don't put your school district account in there. Try it, do it. If you have, like, I have a burner email that I use for a lot of stuff like that, register it, try it out, test it. Because I do think, unlike in the past with like the App Store, we could just say, hey, just let the kids try the apps and figure it out. I think in this case, we as the adults in the room need to at least have some vetting of these before we just throw them out to our students. And then the second part of that is, like, if you do feel like there's a tool that you're feeling strongly, you want to try something new, go to the OEMs, go to the old standards like the Microsofts, the Canvas, the Adobes, the Googles.
Yeah.
They all have something great out there. And they're all just kind of grabbing more and more of these tools. You may not have to look too much further than that. And guess what? We all have probably accounts, a Microsoft or a Google account that we can use that's school district based. So I say start there. And then again, it comes down to I just had this discussion last week because I was talking to Florida virtual schools, and there's a math teacher who's like, well, what about math apps? And I was like, oh, this is just like 10 years ago. And they're like, yeah, that sounds great, but I need a math app for my kids. I'm like, well, let's talk about what could you use this for in math? And again, the teachers are the content experts. It's kind of, I feel like our job as educators and as consultants is to say, here are the wide array of things you can do. Now apply it to your own craft, but they have to have exposure to those possibilities. And so if they're going back to their staff, it's the same thing. Like, hey, here is a wide range of things. You may teach AP physics, you may teach world languages, but here is an app or a tool or even just a large language model like Claude or ChatGPT that could help you, if nothing else, be a thought partner for something that you're trying to struggle with your students. Like, hey, how do I teach this concept better? So even if it's just using it for that, that's a huge win, something we never had in school before.
Yeah. And it's such a great comparison that you made there too, to how we've talked about technology integration in the past, the kind of things that we need to bring into these new or more recent conversations around the AI of it all. So, before we finish up, Carl, would love for you to just share something that maybe a teacher or school leader who's listening and kind of just starting to explore AI tools. What are some simple first steps or maybe quick wins they can try as they're thinking about what AI might mean for them in this second half of the school year?
Yeah, I think the first thing is whenever you're trying something out, again, I would just make it personal. So I try something personal for you and say, hey, let's see how this tool does with a recipe or with a workout plan or with me talking to my now 16-year-old daughter, which, by the way, spoiler alert, it's not great. It does give me some decent advice, but I was like, I would never say that to my kid.
Right.
But so I play with it a little bit there, kind of figure out where it goes. Like, what can it do? What is the depth of which it can go to? And then say, okay, now let me go to my professional craft. And what is something that I know a lot about and expertise in. And now I'm going to probe it with some questions around that and see, like, what can it generate as a result of those questions? And also, what else can I do to really engage kids in the content? And I think this is something that I learned later on with ChatGPT and all the LLMs is asking it to assume a role actually changes the output. So saying, hey, assume the role of a 12th grade student that is learning this for the first time, or assume a role of a master teacher that is trying to teach this concept. And so giving it the role varies the output. And that's something I have not done until probably, honestly, the last few months with AI. And I should have been doing it the whole time. So again, I think those little tidbits and help. And again, as you discuss it and play with it, I always say, try a couple different ones. So have ChatGPT open and have Claude open and have Copilot and say, okay, I'm going to try the same prompt the exact same way and see which one is the better output. Because now we have the ability to get a lot of these for free. So again, test them off. I do little bake-offs. I do it with image generators too. I use Canva, Adobe, Padlet. I'll use Ideogram to create different images. Like, ooh, that one's the one I want for this one particular image or this one diagram.
Yeah.
So play with them and just have that little bit of a bake-off. And then don't feel like you have to learn every single one. I would just say choose 2 or 3 and stick with that.
I think that's great advice for someone who is diving into this or maybe looked at this 2 years ago and is now revisiting, what's possible for them, right, with the AI of it all. So thank you so much for sharing these actionable tips, these big ideas for us to take into the second half of the school year.
Thank you.
It was lots of fun chatting with Carl today. So let's finish up this episode with a few key points to make this EdTech easy. Thoughtful integration of AI tools with proper guidance and monitoring can lessen teacher workloads. Teachers can use AI to streamline administrative tasks like email communication. AI-powered tools enhance creativity by enabling students and educators to create art, music, and designs that might otherwise be inaccessible. Personalized learning with AI requires careful application to avoid falling into adaptive-only approaches. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of resources from this episode by heading to classtechtips.com/podcast. A big thank you to Jotform, the presenter of today's episode, and this special series. If you want to watch the video version of this episode, you can find it exclusively on Jotform's YouTube network. Just head to YouTube and type Jotform in the search bar. To learn more about Jotform and how educational institutions can get a 30% discount on Jotform Enterprise, head to jotform.com/enterprise/education.